Screwing around on Reddit yesterday, I came across a familiar internet joke. It was simply a map of the United States with the caption, "Every state pictured in red is where a minimum wage worker can afford a 2-bedroom apartment." You see, it's funny because none of them are red. The number of times I've seen a joke like this, the comments, the sheer popularity of the post, got me thinking about this joke's moving parts. Sure, listing that we can't afford is kind of an in-joke among millennials, but a big part of humor is subverting expectations, which means that for this joke to really work, the fact that your low-wage job won't pay your rent has to be a surprise. And unless you come from a family who thinks Uber is an adjective, not a company, I'm pretty sure you know that already. Of all the times I've seen this posted, it's never been a surprise that I couldn't afford a 2-bedroom apartment with my minimum wage job. But what about a 1-bedroom? Could I afford just a place for myself with a minimum wage job? And wait, what do I mean by afford? Wait, what do they mean by afford? And are we talking about state minimum wage or federal minimum wage? And if not now, was there ever a time where someone could afford their own place working for minimum wage? And because this is what happens when I hear jokes, I waited for my meds to kick in and dove into the data. So much data. Look at it. But because spreadsheets are about as elegant as a giraffe playing soccer, I turned that data into colorful maps. Enjoy. Visually representing data doesn't do a whole lot if you have no idea what you're looking at. So for a moment, I'm going to define terms and then explain what everything on the map means. If you want to skip this part, note that this video is divided into sections down on the timeline, so feel free to skip around. And with that, let's dive in. I use the federal minimum wage for states that either don't set a minimum or those that set theirs below the federal. Otherwise, I'm using individual state minimums to compare to individual state rental prices, which means this data is about as location specific as I can make it. As far as a baseline budget goes, I'm using 30% of your gross income, meaning before taxes, as my definition of affordable. According to pretty much everywhere that hands out financial advice, you should spend a maximum of 30% of your gross monthly income on housing. They include utilities in that figure. So if you're renting, that means your rent, your heat, water, trash, electricity, your rental insurance, everything should all be less than 30% of your income. Again, before taxes. So that's my baseline, and any state colored friendly green is a place where you can afford to support yourself and live alone without spending more than 30% of your gross earnings from your full-time minimum wage job. From there, the colors get warmer, angrier, however you want to say it, and we change colors every 10%, meaning that more than 30% is yellow, more than 40% is light orange, and so on. One thing I want to point out, anything dark orange or worse means you're paying more than half of your monthly income just to stay out of the rain. Again, before taxes. Right, that's all sorted. Off we go. We're starting off in 1990 and things are already not so great. Which kind of makes sense considering the last time the federal minimum wage increased was in 1981. Skipping to the year 2000 and things are only a tad bit better, mostly owing to a federal minimum wage increase in 1998, where it stayed for 10 years. By 2006, which is the first year that I have individual single-room apartment data, some states had stepped in to raise their minimum wage above the federal rate. In 1998, only 4 states paid more than the federal minimum, but by 2006, that number was 17. In 2008, the federal rate went up over 2 years to $7.25 an hour, which is where it's been ever since. More individual states started stepping in to raise their minimum wage above the federal, but in 2020, no state pays a minimum wage high enough for a person to live alone while working just their full-time job. At least not without spending more than 30% of their gross income. In 2020, the cheapest state is Arkansas, where you'd spend roughly 33% of your gross income to live alone, followed by Missouri at 36%, and rounding out the color bracket is a 5-way tie at 39%. So, that sucks, but how many people does this actually affect? According to census data, we know that between 2 and 3% of all US workers are paid at or below the federal minimum wage. South Carolina actually has the highest percentage of these folks, with around 5% of its workforce. But when we talk about people who make minimum wage, we're not just talking about 2% of the workforce, because 29 states now set a higher minimum wage than the federal rate, and that obscures the data. Also, that 25-cent raise you got 90 days into your job at Wendy's eliminates you from that count, even though you're not making really any more money than you were. To get a better idea of how applicable this map really is, I found this study by the Brookings Institution from November of 2019, so just before the Rona played Mary Hobb with economic figures. At the time, 44% of all US workers were considered low wage. That's more than 2 in every 5 people in the entire US workforce, or around 53 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 64. And when I say low wage, I mean that they make a median income of $10.22 an hour, which isn't much, but it's still a third higher than the federal minimum wage, and also a rate higher than 38 states. So let's use that number. If you have a full-time job making $10.22 an hour, like 44% of all US workers do, where can you afford to live alone? Well, let's hear it for Nebraska and Illinois for having their rates drop into the 30s. Alright, so we know roughly how many people this map applies to, but let's take a quick look at that 30% figure. It's kind of arbitrary, right? Well, yeah, it is, but it comes from somewhere. Supposedly, that 30% benchmark comes from federal regulations in the 70s that said that low-income housing units could only charge a maximum of 25% of a qualifying resident's income. And that rule just kind of stuck. But whatever, no big deal, right? Those 53 million people can still live on their own, they just have to pay a little more than the maximum recommended portion of their income. Well, like so many things in the world, just because a rule is arbitrary doesn't mean you can ignore it. Over the years, that 30% rule became more than just a recommendation. Now, most rental agencies require applicants to make 3 times the rental rate before they can qualify for a lease. So, if your rent is more than 33% of your income, hit the road. Let's ditch percentages for a second and look at that $10.22, which 44% of Americans are earning. That comes to $1,635 a month with a 160-hour full-time job. Nationally, no matter where you live, you're going to pay about 30% of what you make in taxes, which means you now have $1,145 left. Now, if we average out the cost of every single-bedroom apartment in America, excluding Hawaii, because damn, you'd be paying around $730 in rent and basic utilities. So, after rent, after taxes, you've got $405 left. If by some miracle you find the world's cheapest cell phone/internet plan and only fill your gas tank once or ride the bus a little bit, you're down $150. We've solved communication, transportation, shelter, and having a job. Congratulations, you can afford your own place, as long as you have no other expenses and can figure out how to feed yourself for $9 a day. It's doable, but it'll probably make your friend nervous. You know, that friend who co-signed your lease so you could even qualify in the first place. With a budget like this, paying for anything else that costs you more than $30 means you lose $1 a day from your meal plan. So no health insurance, no new clothes, no pets, no car payment, no student loan payments, no fixing anything that breaks, no travel, no going out, and the idea of a savings account becomes a sick joke. If you splurge on some new work shoes and a case of Natty Light to celebrate your job, you're down to $5 a day for the rest of that month. And calculations like this might be why over half of adults under 35 live with their parents right now. So that's pretty grim, but what about those people, and all of us can probably picture them, who say, boo-hoo, get some roommates, get a second job, figure it out. Back in my day, Yeah, all right, let's talk about back in your day. Did you always have to choose between crazy roommates, living with your parents, or crushing student debt? Nope. This map, again, takes 1-bedroom rental rates for each state and compares it to the federal minimum wage, which at the time was $1.60 an hour. The year was 1971. And hey, holy crap, green. Pretend for a moment you're a high schooler in 1971 and your classmates do something awful to you at your senior prom. Instead of going on a psychic murder rampage in response, you could just say, fuck this, I'm out, and go get your own place in one of 24 other states. As long as you can find literally any job, you'd be fine. All while spending no more than 30% of your income on your own place. Let's take it one step further. You get wherever you're going, and you realize that you've made a rash decision. Your savings account isn't growing fast enough. Well, go to college. It won't be easy, but if you worked your full-time, lowest possible paying job during the school year, after taxes, after paying for your own place, and after all your college expenses, you'd have $18 left over at the end of the year. I get that that doesn't sound like much, but your college expenses include all your food, full tuition, and a completely separate extra place to live in your dorm room. Yes, the figure that I'm using is the average cost of tuition, room, and board for a 4-year in-state college. Sure, those 4 years were rough, and I'm sure you'll tell a barista about it sometime in 2009, but instead of entering a hyper-competitive job market with $37,000 of student debt, like your average student today, you can graduate with no debt, take whichever better job sounds nice, and finally ditch this crushing life of poverty you've been living all these years since that terrible night at prom. Yeah, I know. Look, the original joke still works. There's still that catharsis and mild sense of community that comes from socially acknowledging just how f***ed we all are. Depending on your individual life experience, watching your situation go from f***ed to super f***ed can be kind of amusing. After all, if your car is mangled in a ditch, burning away with your life savings in the trunk, does it really matter if it's also raining? But if you need a pick-me-up, here's two. For one, this might not be hopeless forever. There's a lot of talk about raising the federal minimum wage right now to $15 an hour. Here's what that would do to our 2020 map, which now makes it look a lot closer to 1971's situation than what we're looking at today. To put this in perspective, if today's minimum wage represented the same percentage of US productivity that it did in 1971, it would pay more than $19 an hour. So $15 isn't an outlandish notion. As far as the second thing goes, whether you find this to be a good thing or not will definitely depend on who you are. See, 1971 happens to be the year that half of all baby boomers turned 16 and were old enough to get a job. So if you're older than I am and you're justifiably proud of your economic success, I hope this helps explain what we mean when we say things have changed. But if you're like me and for whatever reason you're struggling to figure out how to build any semblance of a stable life before climate change completely throws out the rulebook, the next time a patron at your second job gives you unsolicited life advice about buckling down like they did back in their day, just try to remember this. We didn't magically end up in this situation somehow. People did that. Our parents and grandparents started with this America and took us to this America. But there's still one advantage we have that they don't. Every year that goes by, more of us can vote. In 50 years, a map just like this one will look exactly how we make it look. And I think we can do better.